was looking at these statistics. In the Anxiety and Depression Association of America has reported that anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the U.S., affecting 40 million adults. Nearly 20% of the population 18 years and older. The National Library for Medicine reported over a 10-year span that those affected by anxiety in 18 to 25-year-olds, in a 10-year span, it nearly doubled. The point is, this problem isn't getting better, it's getting worse. Part of the challenge is all of the unknown and uncertainty in life, don't you think? I've been blessed in the past. I have this friend who has this great saying. He says, listen, God does not need to follow my script. And I think, amen, that's true. But my script has a happy ending. Maybe it would be okay. And I think we've all experienced this in some way when life seems scary or uncertain. When anxiety seems actually like the perfect response to the mess of what's going on in life. And our relationship with our spouse is drifting, and we're like, I'm not sure that they love me the way that they once did. Or when the family is growing faster than our income, and we look at our kids and I go, I'm not sure how I'm going to provide for these little people who are now my responsibility. Or maybe your health is failing faster than you thought, and you think to yourself, how long am I going to be able to care for myself and my loved ones well? Or maybe we have demons or doubts that make us unsure if any of life has steady footing. When life is this uncertain, when life is this scary, it's in these seasons we wrestle most with the question, can we trust God when He doesn't follow my script? Now listen, this is a really important question, and I think as Christians we need to be honest with these questions. Thankfully, God's Word helps us navigate all of the challenging questions in life. And this one is no different. I think our passage in Ruth will help us as we navigate through. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Ruth chapter 3. There are some Bibles in the seat pockets in front of you if you don't have them. If you remember, as we have looked at the book of Ruth, we looked at Ruth chapter 1, where there is this family. They have this Israelite family. They have left Bethlehem. They have left God's promised land. They are really running from God to this neighboring community, the neighboring country of Moab. And it's there that disaster strikes. Elimelech, the father, dies. And then the two boys, Mahlon and Chilion, die. And Naomi, she's now the widow of Elimelech, the mother. She and her daughter-in-law, Ruth, are left. But they have this turning where they turn back to God and they return back to Bethlehem. And at the end of chapter 1, it ends with this little glimmer of hope where it started. Remember, it started where there was a drought, there was a famine in the land of Israel. And chapter 1 ends with this little glimmer of hope. The barley harvest had started. And then chapter 2, we see Ruth, Naomi's daughter-in-law, meet Boaz. He's the love interest in this great love story. And Boaz recognizes Ruth's true faith in God. And he begins to provide for Ruth and Naomi. As Ruth is gleaning in the fields, he's telling his workers, listen, don't harass her, don't humiliate her, let her glean. In fact, pull some barley out for her from the packs. And chapter 2 ends with this muted expectation, right? The barley and the wheat harvest have ended. Boaz has been kind. We have seen this great generosity and this great care and provision for Ruth and Naomi. But it's muted because it tells us that Ruth still lives with Naomi. Full rest has not yet been experienced by these two widows in the Promised Land. So this is where we pick up chapter 3 in the book of Ruth. And you remember, we really see Ruth is really written in these there are 4 chapters, but they seem like 4 acts in this great love story. And so we begin looking at the beginning of Act 3, Act 3, Scene 1, where we're really seeing this tension building with Naomi's crazy plan. Those mother-in-laws. You know what I mean? My mother-in-law watches these. I'm in so much trouble. All right. Act 3, Scene 1, tension building with Naomi's crazy plan. Now, the act and the scene begin with Naomi and Ruth, right? They have weathered a lot. And I mean, they have lost their husbands. They have traveled back. They are most likely completely destitute. Ruth is working in this hard manual labor. They are eking along by the grace of God. And now Naomi is sharing this crazy plan. Listen what she says. In Ruth 3, starting in verse 1, she says, Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, shouldn't I find rest? Shouldn't I find rest for you so that you will be taken care of? Now, isn't Boaz our relative? Haven't you been working with his female servants? This evening he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfumed oil, and wear your best clothes. Go down to the threshing floor, but don't let the man know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he's lying. Go in and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will explain to you what you should do." So Ruth said to her, "I will do everything you say." Now, Ruth starts by telling her, "My daughter, shouldn't I find rest for you so that you will be taken care of?" Do you remember in chapter 1, after Elimelech dies and then Mahlon, who is Ruth's husband, dies, Naomi, she said to her 2 daughters-in-law, she said, "May the Lord grant each of you rest in the house of a new husband." And she kissed them, and they wept bitterly. Since returning to Bethlehem, because remember, Ruth had her great confession, "Your people will be my people. Where you go, I will go. Your God is my God." And so she returns with Naomi back. But ever since she's come back, Ruth has worked in the field. Ruth has cared for Naomi. Ruth brought home grain and barley for Naomi to eat. Finally, Naomi has shifted back to caring for Ruth. And Ruth sort of turns their eyes to Boaz. And she says, "Listen, you've been working in Boaz's field." And remember, Boaz has told his servants to allow them to glean there. And he's told his servants, right? He's told them to follow his servants in whatever field they're in. And so Boaz didn't just tell Ruth, "Yeah, go ahead and glean today," or "Go ahead and glean this week." He's saying, no. Go ahead and follow them to whatever field throughout the entire harvest. And remember, it went from barley into wheat. He's saying, in the entire harvest season, stay with my servants. You are welcome. They will be kind. But chapter ended with the positive development that Ruth and Naomi's immediate needs are being met, but by Boaz's loving kindness. Remember that word, hesed, that we've been talking about? But that excitement and expectation is muted by the last line in chapter 2 when it says, Ruth stayed close to Boaz's female servants and gathered grain until the barley and the wheat harvest were finished. There's the positive, and yet it's muted by, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Her final rest has not been taken care of. So Ruth and Naomi are experiencing great blessing, but they're both still widows. Their future is still really uneasy. Life was still scary and uncertain. So chapter 3, act 3 of the drama begins what seems to be a wild plan on Naomi's part. Naomi tells Ruth, this evening he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Now, winnowing barley on the threshing floor is the process of separating the barley from everything else. And so what they would do is they would find a place that either had like a large stone floor that they would polish, or they would pound down the sand or the ground so that it was really hard and compact, and they would throw the wheat or the barley in the air at the sort of late afternoon, early evening when the wind would pick up. And so they'd throw this up in the air, and the wind would blow all of the chaff, all of the lighter things, and the weight of the barley would cause it to drop to the ground. And they would literally be throwing this up, and the wind would blow all the stuff they don't want out, and they would separate it into their food that they were going to eat and that they were going to sell. So this is a huge process. It would have taken a lot of time and a lot of work to get through all the grain. But I want you to think about, this is a huge celebration. They have planted their crop. They have tended it all summer long. It finally got to harvest time. They got it all harvested. They now literally have this pile of money in grain and wheat, and they come together, and there is food, and there is wine, and there is this celebration as they are literally throwing their money in the air and watching. It's like Scrooge McDuck, right? Like, look at all my money, right? It's a lot of work, but it is a celebration and rejoicing in God's provision and blessing for them. So Naomi tells Ruth, in this winnowing, in this celebration, I want you to approach Boaz. And in verses 3, she says, wash, put on perfumed oil, and wear your best clothes. Go down to the threshing floor, but don't let the man know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he's lying. Go in and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will explain to you what you should do. So Ruth said to her, I will do everything you say. I mean, that's wild. So Naomi starts by telling her, listen, wash, put on perfumed oil, and wear your best clothes. Now, remember, Ruth is in mourning for her husband. And in your mourning time, you are not washing as regularly because you're mourning. You aren't wearing perfumed oil. You are abstaining from that because you are mourning, and your clothing reflects your mourning. In the Bible, when we see these three things together, wash, put on oil, and change your clothes, it signals a change in life status. So Naomi tells her to wash, put on this perfumed oil, and wear your best clothes. Now, in poverty, Ruth probably didn't have best clothes. Most likely, Naomi is telling Ruth to change her clothes into an outfit that no longer signifies mourning. She is instead signifying the end of her mourning season. Naomi is telling Ruth to get herself gussied up, both out of respect for Boaz in this culture, but also to indicate the end of her mourning and her readiness for marriage. And then she gives this plan, right? She says, go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know that you're there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, notice the place where he's lying. Go in and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will explain to you what you should do. There is so much tension built into this plan, the way the author is describing it, right? Go to the threshing floor at early evening, but don't let Boaz know you're there. Watch to see where he goes to sleep. And after he's fallen asleep, uncover his feet and lie down. And then after he wakes up, he will tell you what to do. Now, the author is intentionally communicating a bunch of tension for the audience. We're supposed to read this and be like, what is he doing? What is Naomi doing? Why is she sending her daughter-in-law to this man under the cover of night? Why is Ruth instructed to be so covert, right? Don't let the man know that you're there. What's the deal with uncovering his feet? Is there a deeper meaning there we don't understand? The language has the option to be taken in very seductive terms, but it could also be used in very benign terms. So the author has created a lot of tension, but he's left us wondering if there is real tension or if we're reading into what's going on. Act 3, Scene 1, finds us wrestling with the tension building with Naomi's wild plan. Now, Act 2, Scene 2 brings us face to face with the tension that is building with Ruth's bold request. Okay? So Ruth has told Naomi that I will do everything you say, and she does for the most part. Starting in verse 6, it says this, she went down, speaking of Ruth, she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law had charged her to do. After Boaz ate, drank, and was in good spirits, he went to lay down at the end of the pile of barley, and she came secretly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Now, notice where it says, after Boaz ate, drank, and was in good spirits. So this is important, this phrase, in good spirits. It could mean that he's had too much to drink, right? But it doesn't always. The literal translation is his heart was good. It could mean, remember how we talked about he's at the winnowing? This is the celebration of all God had blessed them with the grain and the barley. It could mean that he was just, his heart was good, rejoicing all God had blessed them with. So it could mean intoxication, but it could simply mean that he fell asleep happy and content after the celebration of his harvest. The author has used lots of phrases like this that could be used either way, right? And he's intentionally building tension, right? So is Naomi sending Ruth to proposition Boaz? Is Ruth waiting for Boaz to be intoxicated? We're supposed to feel that tension. Remember, one of the reasons Ruth was looked down on when she first came back is because she was a Moabite. And the history, the origin of the Moabite nation is recorded in Genesis 19, and it's awful. After God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah because of the wickedness found there and the lack of faithful men and women standing up for God, the only one who survives is Lot and his 2 daughters. His wife goes with, but she turns around to long after Sodom and Gomorrah, so God turns her into a pillar of salt. Lot's 2 daughters are engaged to 2 men, and Lot went to them and said, God's going to destroy this place. Come with us as we leave. And they said they didn't believe him, so they stayed and were killed. So Lot is left with his 2 daughters, and they're in the middle of the wilderness, and the daughters look around and go, there are no husbands out here. So they hatch this wicked scheme, and they get their father drunk on wine and then become pregnant with his children. And in Genesis 19, it says this, so both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. The firstborn gave birth to a son named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites. Today, part of the reason the Israelites didn't like the Moabites is because they looked at him and said, your origin is wicked and sinful. We're supposed to understand that history. So when Boaz is in good spirits and Ruth comes to him at night, we're supposed to feel the tension. We're supposed to wonder, is Ruth perpetuating the Moabite sinfulness? In verse 8, it says, at midnight, Boaz was startled. He turned over, and there lying at his feet was a woman. So he asked, who are you? I am Ruth, your servant, she replied. Take me under your wing, for you are a family redeemer. So it says at midnight. The literal translation is halfway through the night. So it's in the middle of the night. And now this is our first hint that Ruth is not acting like Genesis 19. She is acting righteously. Boaz has gone to bed in good spirits, but she has given him through half the night to make sure if he had had some wine that he had slept it off. So Boaz is startled and he asks, who are you? And she replies, I am Ruth, your servant. Take me under your wing, for you are a family redeemer. Now, Ruth looks at him and she says, take me under your wing. Now, in the Bible, being under someone's wing is a really powerful image. It's primarily an image of great protection and care. It has this connotation of deep love and protection. Think of like a mother bird guarding, drawing their little chicks in under their wing, protecting and caring for them. That is the image. That is how the Bible uses this phrase. It is, in fact, the same expression that Boaz has used to Ruth to describe Ruth coming under her true faith in God when he tells her, you have come under the wing of the Lord for refuge. This was Boaz's declaration, right? Like, I know you've come to faith in God. You have come under the wing of God. Ruth has made this good confession in God. She has found shelter under his wing as her Lord. And now Ruth is requesting to come under Boaz's care and protection as her family head. Right? So here in this verse in chapter 2, Boaz has prayed that Yahweh, the covenant personal name of God, would reward Ruth for taking shelter under God's wing. And now Ruth mirrors that language, asking Boaz to act as the human agent through which God will answer his prayer. Ruth isn't propositioning Boaz, she's asking him to propose to her. Why? She tells him, you are a family redeemer. You guys, this word redeem might be the key word in the whole book of Ruth. You really can't understand the book of Ruth. You really can't read it until you understand this word. And it is, the Hebrew word is gaal, means to redeem, restore, to repair, reclaim. You know, in the book of Ruth only has like 85 verses. And in those 85 verses, a form of this word, gaal, is used 23 times. See, in the Israelite law, family was one of the most important things. It was one of the most important things. And so if someone died, a close relative could redeem, they could restore, repair, reclaim the family. This meant that they could buy the family land, right? The land was really important. It was the promised land of God. Uh, so they could buy this land back at a really, like an incredible price. And then they would also be required to marry the widow, and any children that the new husband had with the widow actually were credited to the first husband so that his family line would continue. This would restore, it would repair, it would reclaim, it would redeem the entire family. So Ruth has asked, right, take me under your wing. Will you propose marriage to me because you are a family redeemer? You can restore and redeem our family. So although the author keeps building this tension, right? Like, what are Naomi and Ruth up to? Is there something illicit going on here? The author also keeps dousing any expectation of that with cold water, drawing us back to the character of Ruth and Boaz. So as scene 2 continues, we see Boaz's response that the tension doesn't go away, but it shifts to the tension building in Boaz's gracious response. So why didn't Naomi just go to Boaz during the day? Why not just go to him in the field? Why all this cloak and dagger? Why in the middle of the night with no one around? Don't you think that makes it a little bit more dangerous? And here's why. They did it to protect not only themselves, but to protect Boaz and to protect his honor and to show him great honor. In the culture that they were living in, showing respect was crucial. And had Naomi or Ruth approached Boaz in front of other people and said, "Would you redeem us?" They would have put him on the spot. They would have put his honor at risk in front of people. What if he didn't want to marry Ruth? It would have been shameful for him to refuse the request of a close relative. They would have risked shaming this man who had so generously provided for them. And let's not forget, Ruth is a Moabitess. She was the gulf in standing between these two, between Ruth and Boaz, cannot be overstated. The very idea of a Moabite approaching an Israelite man of standing proposing marriage would cause people to gasp. So Naomi's plan, although seemingly incredibly dangerous and foolish, is intended to show great honor and respect and care for Boaz. And when we read Boaz's response, it's clear that he understands this. Because look at how he responds in verse 10. He says, then he said, "May the Lord bless you, my daughter. You have shown me more kindness now than before." Boaz understands how they have just shown him honor. And then he says, "Because you have not pursued younger men, whether rich or poor. Now don't be afraid, my daughter. I will do for you whatever you say, since all the people in my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Yes, it is true that I am a family redeemer, but there is a redeemer closer than I am. Stay here tonight, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem you, that's good. Let him redeem you. But if he doesn't want to redeem you, as the Lord lives, I will. Now lie down until morning." You see, Boaz understands Ruth's actions as hesed, as this loving kindness. And he tells her, don't be afraid, my daughter. I will do for you whatever you say, since all the people in my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Boaz continues his care and comfort of Ruth when he says, "Don't be afraid." there is this crazy plan. You have just approached this man of noble character in the middle of the night. He could have stood up and he could have caused a ruckus and it would have been disastrous. And he looks at her and he says, don't be afraid, my daughter. And then he says, all the people in my town know that you are a woman of noble character. You remember at the beginning of chapter 2 when the author gives us this description of who Boaz is, he says Boaz was a man of noble character. You see, what the author is doing, he's showing us that based on character, these two are a perfect fit. Boaz is an Israelite man of noble character. Ruth is a Moabite widow. But their noble character makes them a perfect fit. Ruth, a woman of noble character, is the perfect wife for Boaz, a man of noble character. You guys know, in the oldest complete manuscript of the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew, it's called the Leningrad Codex. The author of that, or the order of that, puts Proverbs and then the book of Ruth. And if you guys read your Proverbs, you may know that the last proverb, Proverb 31, ends with the description on the wife of noble character. It says this, who can find a wife of noble character? She is far more precious than jewels. And after this acrostic that goes through a wife of noble character in this Leningrad Codex, it went right into the book of Ruth, described as a woman of noble character. The implication is that Ruth is the embodiment of this exemplary woman. But Boaz has one information that he needs to be clear with Ruth, and he says, yes, it is true that I am a family redeemer, but there is a redeemer closer than I am. Stay here tonight, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem you, that's good. Let him redeem you. But if he doesn't want to redeem you, as the Lord lives, I will. Now lay down until morning. Now here's Boaz declaring to Ruth, you are the perfect wife for me. But he doesn't say, boy, whatever it takes, Ruth, whatever it takes, we're going to make this happen. Boaz declares this great trust in God. And this great trust in God's sovereignty. And it allows Boaz to be content with God's will regardless of the outcome. Boaz is content to apply biblical principles even to this situation. According to God's law, there is someone closer. And he says, listen, you're a woman of noble character. You are perfect. But maybe God has something better that I can't see. I will be faithful to God's principles and trust in Him. Boaz is content to do his duty and to leave the results up to God. I wonder how many of us can say that. How many of us can keep from scheming and maneuvering, justifying and pushing and pushing and pushing for God to act and bless the way that we want, for God to follow my script. The author of Ruth is challenging us through Boaz to find our peace in a deep faith that whatever God ordains is good, even if we don't see it. All right. Verses 14 and 15, he says this, So she lay down at his feet until morning, but got up while it was still dark. Then Boaz says, don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. And he told Ruth, bring the shawl you are wearing and hold it out. When she held it out, he shoveled 6 measures of barley into her shawl, and she went into the town. So notice again his care for her. Listen, if people see you here, all of this tension we've been feeling, they're going to feel too. And then he heaps these 6 measures of barley into Ruth's shawl, and there's no way to know, like, measures changed based off of who it was. The best guess is it's something like 18 to 29 pounds of barley. Can you imagine? Here, hold out your coat. I'm going to pour this in. All right, here, I'll put this on your back for you. You haul this back to your mother-in-law, right? He's again caring for and providing for both Ruth and Naomi. Remember how Naomi said when she came back to Bethlehem, she said, listen, I went away full, but I've returned empty. And yet Boaz continues to send, barley and wheat, and he continues to provide for them. It's as if Boaz seems to continually be signaling to Naomi, you will be empty no more. What a sweetheart. All right, so we conclude this with Act 3, Scene 2, when we see tension dissipate in patience. We've seen the author create all this tension. Are Naomi and Ruth acting inappropriately? Will Boaz reject them? What will happen to these widows? And with one reply from Boaz, the tension almost all fades away. Not because of Boaz, but because Boaz has so clearly communicated his faith and faithfulness to God. So Ruth returns to Naomi and says this. She went to her mother-in-law Naomi, who asked her, "What happened, my daughter?" Then Ruth told her everything the man had done for her. She said, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley because he said, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Naomi said, "My daughter, wait until you find out how things will go, for he won't rest until he resolves this today." So she goes back to her mother-in-law, and Naomi says to her, what happened? The literal translation, she says, "Who are you, my daughter?" Which is interesting when she says my daughter. She knows who she is, right? What I think she's asking is, who are you? Are you Mahlon's widow? Or are you Boaz's wife? Naomi wasn't sending Ruth off for an illicit encounter with Boaz. She was sending her off to see if Boaz would act as their kinsman redeemer. She knew exactly what she was asking Boaz for. And so then Ruth told her everything the man had done for her. And Naomi says, "My daughter, wait until you find out how things go, for he won't rest until he resolves this today." Ruth is finally being invited to rest. She has journeyed to Bethlehem. It's God's promised land with God's chosen people, but she's probably never been there before. She's gleaned in the harvest fields to provide for herself and her mother-in-law. She's traveled down to the threshing floor to see Boaz, and she returns to Naomi with the barley from Boaz. And finally, after months and months of work, Ruth can rest while Boaz will be working on her behalf. Finally, Naomi and Ruth understand the rest offered not in our own strength, but in God. Sinclair Ferguson, he's a pastor from Glasgow, he commented on this in this way. He says, "We have every reason to rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. There is never a good reason to run ahead of God." So Acts 3 ends with a new day and a new hope. Perhaps through Boaz, Naomi's prayers of rest for Ruth will finally be realized. And I think what we're being challenged to do in this act is we're being invited to rest. But not to rest in our own efforts, but to rest in our faith in God's protection and provision. Because the nature of life in a fallen world is anxious, and despite our best efforts, life is going to throw us a few curveballs. What Ruth is inviting us to see is God's hand working in the background. Ruth is inviting us to take comfort and rest in God, despite our circumstances, not because God will make everything work out the way that we want, but because God is working to redeem us to Him. When my father-in-law was hospitalized and we weren't sure he was going to make it, I was talking to my brother-in-law, who said to me, he said, Peter, we know where he's going. He's made a good confession of Jesus Christ. We've said to him what we need to say. He knows that we all love him. This isn't the script any of us would write, but God has redeemed his child. And when we pull back far enough, there is great rest in that truth. When we see God's fingerprint woven through life like that, when we begin to see things like challenges in relationships or finances or health or even past demons and doubt, it's not as a tragic ending to our story, but as a part of the journey, as part of the refining process as God redeems his children in his master plan, which is far greater and more loving and tender than mine. See, others have commented that Ruth is pointing forward to the ultimate kinsman redeemer in Jesus Christ. They are finding their comfort and their love and their redemption from God through the kinsman redeemer in Boaz. But Ruth is wanting us to look forward to our ultimate kinsman redeemer in Jesus Christ. See, because Jesus came to earth as fully God and yet fully man, God tells us he is the firstborn. He is, in one sense, our kinsman. And when he died on the cross, when the sins of the world were placed on his shoulders, and he died in our place, and then 3 days later rose again, offering forgiveness to all who would receive, he became our Redeemer for all who will accept his offer of forgiveness. You see, we can trust God's script, not because we've read it and it looks better than ours, although it does, but because God, in his grace, has sent his Son to be what we really need, a kinsman redeemer for our souls, to restore, to repair, to reclaim our very souls to God. Why do we find our rest in God's script and not our own? Because of the grace of God. So we started by asking, when life is scary and uncertain, can we trust God when he doesn't follow our script? Do you see how the book of Ruth pulls back the curtain to these really ordinary lives of Naomi and Ruth and Boaz? And consistently what we see is the loving kindness, the chesed of God, carried out by one person to another on behalf of God. Consistently what we see when we pull back the curtain is the redemption of God. Maybe not in the way that we planned, but in a more profound way than we ever imagined. And what we see is that since we can trust the goodness of God, we should work diligently, as Ruth did, resting not in our own ability, but in the sovereignty of God. You see, Ruth, you guys, doesn't end. The book of Ruth does not end with the famous Disney lines of they lived happily ever after. Ruth ends with the redemption of Naomi and Ruth, which leads to the redemption of the whole nation of Israel through Ruth's great-grandson, King David, which leads to the redemption of all mankind through Jesus from the line of David. Can we trust God when he doesn't follow my script? The emphatic answer from the book of Ruth is yes. We are being invited to peer behind the curtain to see the work of God behind the scenes in the really ordinary, the mundane, the regular parts of life, so that we see the goodness and the sovereignty of God woven through everything, even the challenges and difficulties of normal life. This is the rest we're being invited to, not a foolhardy or anxiety-riddled or temporary rest, but a deep rest for our souls as we begin to see all of life through the lens of a good, sovereignly working God, with eternal redemption for all who come under the wing of Jesus Christ as our kinsman redeemer. We will forego our final song today, and I'll pray and go. Lord, we thank you for this morning and this chance just to be blessed by your word. Pray that the truth of your care and compassion, your love, your hesed for us, a love when those who expect, who have the right to expect nothing, receive everything. We thank you that we have received everything from you. Pray that the truth of that would sink deep into our hearts, and as we go, praise for you would be on our lips. We love you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. You are dismissed. May the Lord bless you this week.